Hi, and welcome to Plugged In. I'm Catherine Spetch, and I co-lead our global gaming practice here at Odgers Berndtson Executive Search. Hate to talk about the weather, but I'm going to have to because it finally feels like we're heading into summer in the UK. The sun's out, my hay fever's back, and developing Gamescom are around the corner, so all is good. And as we move into summer, I am thrilled to be joined by the brilliant, if not slightly elusive, Fred Wester, CEO and President of Paradox Interactive. How are you, Fred?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very good. Thank you. As I said, sun's out here, which is a welcome relief because it hasn't been that great, the weather here. But I'll stop talking about the weather because it's not that fun. Thank you for joining us today. So quick intro to Fred, although I'm probably doing him a huge disservice saying that because there's an awful lot that I could mention. But for the sake of time, having joined Paradox Entertainment as a consultant prior to the spin out, Fred's been with the Paradox Interactive business from the very, very beginning, which is 20 years, or certainly will be next month, and has been CEO for 11 of those 20 years. And during his time there and his leadership, Paradox has completely transformed from being a small niche studio to an international publisher. And I got in touch with Fred because I was really keen to hear his views on the future of the Swedish games market in particular. But it would be a little bit remiss of me not to first chat about 2023 being a pretty big year for Paradox. There's a great slate of game releases, and Mechabellum launched earlier this month to a fantastic reception. So it all looks quite good over there, Fred, but how are things from your perspective?
It's very, very good. I mean, we've had a dry spell on the release of games for a year and a half, and all of a sudden we have a lot of releases coming at once. You mentioned Mechabellum. We released 2 weeks before that, or a week and a half, we released Age of Wonders 4. That did really well as also. And obviously we've announced a couple of more titles in Life by You, which is a life simulator, and also Cities Skylines 2, of course, is coming later on this fall. So and Lamplighters League as well. So we have a pretty busy schedule over here, and we're really looking forward to showing more of these games for sure. And both Mechabellum and Age of Wonders 4 are doing really well so far.
The reception to Mechabellum has been phenomenal. Everything I see is all positive, so it can't be bad. So as I said, I'm really keen to get your view on the Swedish games market in particular, because it is a fascinating one. It's a major talent hub, as I said, for sure. But interestingly, it continues to be relatively insular, I would say, with less expats than you'd necessarily expect. And there's been a huge increase in the number of gaming companies that are in Sweden over the last 4 or 5 years, which is phenomenal. I think it's about an 80% increase. But about 90% of those studios employ 10 or less people. So we can probably come back to some of those points, but I think what I'm really keen to ask you is what you think the most exciting things are that are happening in the Swedish market at this point in time.
Yeah, it's a bit of up and down in the Swedish games market at the moment. We have a lot of good studios, as you mentioned, and only a block from where we sit with our office, I think we have 2,000 people working in the games industry. Like you can walk basically 300, 400, 500 meters and just only almost meet game developers. So it's a hub just south of the center of Stockholm. And it's, like I mentioned, a lot of these studios are smaller. You could call it, say, more lifestyle type of game studios that doesn't necessarily need to grow more because they almost already make a really good living off from what they do. So a lot of those people have no ambition in growing and no idea or no like proper strategy to
it's
grow.
Funny actually, Fred, you've kind of beat me to one of the questions that I was going to ask you later on, which is great because that was going to be my question about whether actually are they lifestyle businesses or are they not getting the support they need to grow? But it sounds, as you say, that a lot of those studios want to be the size and scale that they're at and don't have ambitions to grow past that point, which is absolutely fine and works.
I absolutely believe so, but I also believe we have a couple of really good gaming studios that have been growing. Some of them with certain parts international ownership, that capital that has come in from the side. But one of the reasons the games industry has been able to grow so much and so fast with so many people is that the ecosystem has been growing together with the games business. So 10 years ago, there was no money really in the games industry, but now we've had a lot of exits, with the biggest one and the most remarkable being obviously King, that was sold for, I think, 5.5 billion, and the original founders cashed out quite a bit on that. So they had some money to put into the rest of the games industry, which they also did. You obviously have Mojang, sold to Microsoft quite a long time ago. It's 10 years ago, I think now, or something like that. So Marcus and his crew is also a part of this ecosystem. You have a lot of smaller exits as well, and part exits that help grow the ecosystem. So people reinvest in the games industry, and they reinvest in things around the games industry, and services, education, and supporting software as well. So yeah, the ecosystem is really, I think, what makes the whole system grow.
Brilliant. And do you think there have been any fundamental changes in the Swedish market over that period? I think I said, the last 5 years-ish has seen such a big increase in those companies. Has there been any particular, I suppose, light switch that has gone on to make that change, other than the investment flowing back in from some of those sales?
Well, I think one of the big trends is foreign investors mostly, and we're talking about tech giants like Tencent has been very active in buying not only bigger studios, but also smaller, talented studios, or I would say Chinese investors in general. I've seen NetEase being very active in the market as well. So obviously it's good to get capital, but it's also a bit sad, obviously, to see that foreign investors are owning more and more of the games industry here locally. One of the reasons, I think, is that the industry has grown very fast, but we've never developed, I think, a layer of really competent and solid C-level executives at the rate that the industry has developed. I mean, we have some of those, but we would need even more people on C-level executive that could actually continue to run the business and develop it further, because that's a craft and a style in itself. So that's the next step for the Swedish games industry, to really be an international competitor like the Japanese or the American companies, rather than just staying with small and independent companies like we are mostly at the moment. But the talent is here for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because as I mentioned at the beginning, it is one of the largest European talent hubs now. And, I know that when we're doing searches, absolutely, the Swedish market is somewhere that we go for great talent. But that tends to be at the -1 level from C-suite, I would say, rather than C-suite. And I was going to ask you, what challenges from a talent perspective do you think the Swedish market faces? And I suppose whether they're different to the rest of the gaming industry, or are they the same? And you've mentioned that C-suite problem. I think in founder-led industries, and the Swedish market is particularly founder-led, you do see that being an issue. There is often a gap between that founder and CEO type level through to the leadership team that person brings on. In your opinion, do you think there's anything that can be done in the short term? I mean, longer term, it's about investing in the talent, right? And making sure that the right development programs are in place. But what do you think can be done in the short term? Are there any kind of behavioral changes that can be made across the industry?
Well, there has been a lot of the market has been shaking a lot recently as well. Money is more expensive, obviously, with interest rate hikes, and it's harder. Like, you don't get the valuations you used to only a year ago. So I think some of the things that we're seeing, it doesn't really have anything to do with this specific talent problem, is that people kind of go back to their core to focus on what actually makes the money and actually makes the company go round. So that's a big change. When I went to a game developers conference, this was the talk of the town. I think at least that's what we're doing. So maybe I'm a bit biased, but I think a lot of it was like finding back to the business models of the future, because I also think that one of the trends is that a 600-man studio is very expensive, and you will have to sell millions and millions of copies. And the industry, I think, has to go back a bit to its roots to see what makes a game sell is not the number of people working on it. It's actually the basic functions, the basic fundamentals of the game that makes it fun. And you mentioned Mechabellum that we released just recently. Now I get to mention that again here. But you take a game like Valheim that released, I think, a year and a half ago or something, 2 years ago maybe. Valheim, it's developed in Sweden as well, not in the Stockholm area, but more in the middle of the country. I think it was a handful of people working on the game, and they sold millions of copies already. And graphics are not absolute top-notch, like the 4K that you would expect from a AAA title, but it still is a game that is very addictive. It has great basic mechanics, and it's there for the players. So I think there will be at least a small reset in the industry where people will feel like, let's go back and see how do we actually fundamentally make games that are fun for people to play. And I think a lot of people will have to change their ways of working to make the player focus come back into play.
Yeah, I think we were starting to see that before the pandemic hit, or even early pandemic, kind of 2020 onwards, in that there were a lot of senior execs within the industry moving away from the large developers or publishers to set up their own studios, which became a problem for me in some of the searches that I had. But it was great to see, because for that innovation cycle to continue and be at its best, you need that to happen. I think the frustrating thing is there's been a bit of a pause on that because of the investment landscape. And as you said, it's more expensive to borrow money. A lot of the VC firms have slowed down in terms of the money that they're giving to people. So for all people made that leap to do just that, I think there's been a bit of a pause on how quickly that can come to fruition. But hopefully in the next 2 years, we'll start to see more of that coming to games coming to market from that route, which would be fantastic, because as you said, it's almost a reset for the industry, and it's just a new evolution within the industry.
Yeah, another trend that I'm seeing now that you mentioned this is that in Stockholm, you see at least 6 or 7 teams in the last half a year who's been jumping ship from the bigger publishers and developers to start their own studios. And they have the experience, they hopefully have what they need to create a great game. And if some of them will succeed, I guess, obviously some will fail, but some will succeed and create the ecosystem further into the future. And that's been, I think, another thing that we have in Sweden is the cooperation in between the studios. I mean, we call each other, we're on a very friendly basis normally. So we've called it friendly competition, that you want to be the best, obviously, you want to sell the most, you want to be the one on the front cover of the magazines, but it doesn't help you from helping other people, because it's an ecosystem after all, and we kind of share the talent pool, and we're growing it together rather than just trying to compete for all the talent and all the money and everything. So we're kind of growing it together, and I think it's a good sentiment in the market. It's a good ambience in the market.
Yeah, and I think hopefully that does travel across the industry and not just Sweden, certainly within the smaller markets anyway, because you need the ecosystem to work for all of you, and especially from a talent perspective, as you said, because if everyone does work in silos and tries to be extremely competitive from a talent standpoint, it means that C-suite that we feel isn't quite where it perhaps should be is never going to come to fruition, because really it needs to be a collective effort, because the reality is these senior leaders, if they aren't going to move away from Sweden, there is a little bit of a carousel, for want of a better phrase, and you see it in places like Montreal as well, over in Canada. And I think it is very important for the senior leaders within those businesses to talk and to share, so that things can evolve together rather than trying to work in silos. I mean, some things you've got to keep secret, right, Fred? But you know, it's I think it's a good thing for the industry, for everybody to collaborate. Absolutely.
Totally agree.
And in terms of, we've talked about talent challenges. Are there any other challenges that you see coming down the track for the Swedish market or games industry as a whole, Fred?
Well, we'll see also where the platform wars lead, because I think Microsoft and Epic have been very aggressive in giving out guarantees to developers and publishers, and they are more and more kind of cautious in doing that, which coincides, unfortunately, with the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, the interest rate hikes, the electricity crisis. So everything comes at once. And to some developers, this is going to be a big hit. I said a couple of years ago that if you're not making money right now in the games industry, you're never going to make money. Well, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, because the market was just flooded with money. But now the challenges are going to be, will people play your games without the Microsoft and Epic money? And Microsoft also, I saw when Phil Spencer spoke about, he had a long interview just a couple of weeks back, and I couldn't really figure out the strategy of Microsoft. So it's really interesting to hear, because he said, on the other hand, we're not going to out console, as he put it, Sony and Nintendo, but it looks like they're not going to pay the same amounts for Game Pass deals anymore to developers and publishers. So I'm a bit curious to see what Microsoft comes up with, because after all, they are the owners of the OS Windows, where people play a lot of games. So they have a strategic challenge there if they want to use it. Maybe a future acquisition of Steam is in the making. I don't know, like, it's just speculation, but I would believe that they're going heavier into PC gaming than before. So we'll see. I mean, it's going to be very interesting times, and we have good cooperations with all the platform owners and are in constant contact with them, but they're also very secretive.
Well, I was going to say, I called you elusive at the beginning of this interview. I think they're far more elusive than you are, which is,
I mean, I would say,
I don't think there's ever been a time in the industry whereby, you know, developers and publishers have looked to find out exactly what the platforms are doing more than now, you know, and trying to work out their thinking, because they've always sat on the periphery of the industry, and it's always about trying to second guess what's coming next, because you never do quite know. But it's hopefully that it's right for the overall industry rather than just driving their own commercials as well, I suppose.
And the whole Activision deal, Microsoft Activision deal, is also up in the air. So in the UK they said no, in the EU they said yes. So we'll see where this lands as well, because it's going to be a defining deal for the whole industry. And they already have Bethesda, for example, and they already bought Obsidian, and they have a couple of other really hard-hitting studios as well. So it's going to be a very interesting consolidation phase for the industry going forward, because this just continues at a rapid pace. So it's interesting, and I'm not even following from the sideline. I mean, it feels sometimes that you're in the ball game as well. So it's super exciting times.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Fred. It's been fantastic, and hopefully speak soon.
Yeah, thank you.